I was in the DC suburbs. I grew up around there, and like it was common for my friends' parents to have hour plus commutes getting in and out of DC. That's one way. So 2 hours of their day spent static in a car and moving forwards. All right, welcome everyone to the Bioinformatics Lab podcast. I'm Kevin Libuit with Andrew Page. We are from Theogen, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the nuances of remote bioinformatics work. Andrew, you've had a crazy career of, spanning when bioinformatics needed to be done on site, on prem. This is the computer we use, all the way to it's in the cloud. No one needs to be here on site. And then every hybrid variation thereof. What's your perspective on the new world of remote work and maybe some conversation of, forced in-office work and how, your opinion lands on that, hot topic?
Yeah. Oh, it's a very hot topic. Yeah. So yeah, I spent many years in offices, and then pandemic comes along. It's all obviously remote work, and then there's kind of a bit of a hybrid, and now I'm fully remote for the past 2 years, and it's very interesting the journey there because mathematics these days it doesn't need to be done in an office because, as you say, it's all in the cloud. It's all available there. Whereas in previous years, you'd have to be physically in an office because your institute might have a cluster or something like that, or a storage system that you need access to, and transmitting that kind of data around, it just doesn't work. You need to be kind of near where the data is. Whereas now, the world is your oyster. You can be anywhere in the mountains in Seattle or whatever, and it doesn't really matter. And you and I were on opposite sides of the world. We're what 8 hours and time zone difference, and yet we can work together as colleagues. So I guess remote bioinformatics does allow you to hire the best people in the entire world to work together on the same stuff, and it doesn't matter where they are. You can all work together. What do you think, Kevin?
No, that I think that's a real obvious benefit is the flexibility. Something big in the US, I'd imagine it's similar in the UK and the EU and maybe the world at large, is like impact of quality of life as it associates with time of commute. The longer your commute, the worse your quality of life. And that's a big thing in the US where it's like there's central workplaces in cities and then suburban sprawl everywhere. So I was in the DC suburbs. I grew up around there, and like it was common for my friends' parents to have hour plus commutes getting in and out of DC. That's one way. So 2 hours of their day spent static in a car and moving forward. So like the perception of like the workforce is commute bad. So and that was conflated with in person means commute means remote better. And there's a ton of benefits, obviously, to being remote and flexible. You and I are able to work together in the way that we have been, and any company has access to a global workforce in that way. And so there's a lot of obvious benefits, but I think now there's also a conversation of what are we missing by not being in person? And I think you and I see that a lot because we have this chance to work remote, but every now and then you and I get to meet up at either a conference or a dedicated meeting, and it's like there's this whole other aspect. There's literally dimensions of each other that we don't get to see when we're just virtual. And I think me and my time in the workforce, it's always been at least hybrid for me. So I'm very used to the virtual side. Whereas you have the experience of you were full time on site, full time in person for maybe the majority of your career. What is it that we're missing in doing strictly remote, or what
Yeah.
values do you think we should be cognizant of if we're only virtual? What aspect of this is also maybe left in the blind spot of the glamour that is remote, flexible work?
Well, I can tell you, I don't miss my previous job's commute, which was 70 miles each way, so 140 miles, and that was an hour and a half each way, so 3 hours a day in a car every day. And of course, now I can spend that time actually working and doing other stuff or going for a run or whatever. And but yeah, the in-person stuff, you do see it. It's quite useful. Like say you and I, when we made up, we've gone for runs. And there's a lot you can get in a 5K, just chatting away about random stuff, and then you learn about that person and their interests, and then you can have a better working relationship with that person and actually get a lot more done. And it's often then people, obviously you talk about work and you find out maybe problems and issues, and you can then better fix them. And a lot of that won't happen on a Zoom call because people, are afraid, I think, sometimes to have those very informal conversations. But in person, maybe over the water cooler, you might find out the real reason why someone is underproductive, or maybe the real reason why someone is very upset about a particular issue. Maybe it's a technical problem, and that they don't really want to admit that maybe they need more resources or something like that. And whereas in person you can read the body language, you can see all the other kind of tells and things like that, and you can work it out.
That's exactly right. Like the water cooler example is such a good example or good frame where there's just informal meeting spaces where communication and discussion happens. And creating that in a virtual company, you got to be cognizant of that because exactly to your point, when you're putting a meeting on a calendar, you're putting a meeting on a calendar for a formal reason. It's like, hey, we're going to talk about this work problem. So, every now and then maybe there's a couple of minutes where you're bantering back and forth as you wait for people to join. But how do you create that space outside of that? We've been pretty, intentional about that and having, Slack channels where people are posting about their families, their vacations. We literally have a Slack channel called Water Cooler where we just, pass back and forth informal communication so people can have their personality shine. And that has been effective. And on top, but and that said, I think on top of that, there's other layers where you can add of how do we encourage in-person meetups as much as possible, and we're trying to do that more and more, even with regional conferences and things like that along the way. And it's been effective, at least for a company like us. We started virtual, so we never got that aspect of our culture taken away, and it's actually allowed us to grow in this kind of a way. But yeah, it's also nuts being in like the Seattle area, seeing a lot of companies now force return to office. Like that's like the term now. So what are your thoughts on that, especially on productivity? And is this a veiled attempt to not have to do layoffs because they know people won't actually move to the city and return to office? Or do you feel like this is a proper, sincere pursuit towards a productivity that can't be reached in a virtual environment?
It's a difficult one because obviously you're employing highly skilled people in bioinformatics, and that attracts a lot of different personality types. Some people are very, they can just lock themselves away and, zone in on a problem and really, really get to the root of it. And, they need absolute concentration and quiet and whatever. But other people do need that social aspect. And if it's not there, then it can cause problems, for them and their mental health and whatever. And there is a return to work thing here as well, where companies are progressively asking people to come in a little bit more. And some are enforcing it, some are not. And it is interesting to see how that's having an impact on people. Sometimes I think managers just like to, be around and order people around and see their own importance or whatever. But I think for the most part, it's just around having some kind of touching base every now and again does seem to help overall, teams function.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's completely disconnected, sometimes things can get lost in the cracks, and maybe you're not a very social person and you don't engage with things. You might just fall through the cracks, and it might be a few days between when you have left your house and not, and isolation can be a problem for people.
Ooh.
So you do need things there yourself to make sure that you have that I guess that extra support system when you're totally remote. Like for me, I go running regularly and obviously family, whatever. And so that gets me out and about in the house from the house. But you can see some people who maybe might never leave the house for a weekend end.
Yeah,
People,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a really important part of that too. Okay, and I think this is a nice conversation for us to have because there is a lot of obviously value for the remote side, but there's considerations to take into account too. The isolation aspect, you don't want to your whole as many hours as we work, it being strictly through a virtual environment. It's like, okay, let's remember you do live in the 4D universe,
Yeah.
and make sure that you have other aspects where you do get that, community vibe IRL. And another thing too, just we can wrap up on this, but one huge benefit of when I was working in person in the lab in Virginia, the director would be eating lunch in the same cafeteria as I did, and every now and then I was able to walk up to her and just have conversations and just be in brushing elbows with the absolute leaders of our organization. So being able to create that virtually, you have to be intentional about it. We don't have just a cafeteria, but you have to have this a means by which everyone can feel like they are under the same roof, and that they are accessible in that way. So remote work, man, it's a wild one.
It's a hard one, yeah. And the other thing I was thinking is it can be very intense as well because, if you schedule one Zoom meeting after another with no
Yeah.
breaks, and that can happen quite a lot, because people see a gap in your calendar and it's like, oh, I'll just jump in there. And so you're suddenly going from topic to topic to topic, whereas in the real
Yeah.
world, you might have like 5 minutes to, walk from one room to another or whatever, or collect yourself, and that gives you time to reset and think about the next problem. But when you're just kind of go 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 go, it can be like very mentally taxing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find it quite difficult thinking, geez, what am I thinking about now, and oh, it's this one, yeah,
Yeah.
and it takes you a minute or two.
All right. With that, I'm sure this is a topic we'll keep touching on in the future. But remote work, bioinformatics, return to office. We'll see everyone in the next one. Cheers.